This time, Beck and forth, Cambridge take the direct route up the leagues.
And it's no nay never, no nay never no more, 'cause I'll stay a while over forever and more. And it's no nay never, no nay never no more, 'cause I'll stay a while over forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the seemingly impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn. I am crowbarring references to Thames Valley Royals where they don't belong, and joining me, as ever, Jamie Rooney.
Do you know what? I've been troubled all week with the way we ranked the Great West German team. Yeah, I mean, you referenced Mohan Bagan was ranked, and I think Mohan Bagan is very right with the wonderful guest that we got on tonight. We ranked him as true greats, and there we are, ranking the Great West German team with Sepp Herberger as only just a touch of greatness and flirting with edge of greatness. I feel...
Yeah, I was for edge of greatness.
The end of season review can't come quick enough for me.
Definitely so. And as you mentioned, the guy who was with us for Mohan Bagan, we have once again back in the room, all the way from Portsmouth.
Oh, right. You shouldn't have.
It's Jamie
Very
Wilson.
much so. It's great to be back. Do I get a hat-trick ball? I think it's my third one. I love it. No, it's really, really good to be back. I'm excited about this one as well. I think there's a lot of good stuff.
You are now the first person who gets the theme tune when they come on, which I like the idea of. I particularly like that one, obviously, because I am obsessed by songs that teams come out to at games. I mean, some of the ones are absolutely extraordinary. What I particularly like, and obviously that is the song that Portsmouth come out to, is when they choose the song. And I should offer up the caveat that the team I support, Oxford, is scandalously poor. We barely have a consistent song at all. We've tried just about everything. Anything with yellow in it, really. We had Yellow by Coldplay, which was a bit melancholic, which kind of matched the season pretty well in the football we were playing at the time. We had a Swedish neo sort of punk band, Yellow and the Blue, which was very good, and recently we're coming out to Yellow Submarine. But at least with those, you can see what the logic is. There's yellow for Oxford. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of the songs that teams come out to, the connection becomes lost after a while. So, if, for example, you aren't particularly familiar with either Portsmouth or Mike Oldfield's back catalogue, would you know why Portsmouth come out to that song?
It's a great one. It really gets the crowd going, actually, now. The whole place starts clapping and it gets the vibe going. But to go to your point about teams coming out to poor songs, we used to come out, when I first started going, to Tina Turner's Simply the Best. And this is when we were struggling awfully at the bottom of the second tier on a regular basis. And it used to grate with me even then. I never really liked the song. And to come out to Simply the Best, when we clearly weren't anywhere near that. So, yeah, I think it was great that they did make that change to Mike Oldfield's Portsmouth, which at least works well.
Fratton Park has a fantastic atmosphere. It's probably one of the more volatile grounds to go to in the English league. Still, actually, it's still quite old school and traditional. I'm not sure Mike Oldfield Portsmouth really sets up the Welcome to Hell Galatasaray feel, but it's good. But and when you think about some of the the other ones, I think about sort of Everton and Watford coming out to the theme to Z Cars. I mean, Z Cars hasn't been on the TV now for like 50 years. What? Yet the tradition lives on.
Yeah.
One of the other things we've been doing. Go on.
I have to share this. So this week I met up with a couple of great old friends that I haven't seen for some time. One of those friends of mine, well, both actually, but one of them, Paul, is an avid listener to our podcast, was very complimentary about the things that we talk about. He liked the idea that we'll be taking him back into the days gone by and talking about pieces of football and timelines of football that he could really relate to. And he asked me, so what are you doing this week? And I said, we've got Cambridge United. We're doing John Beck's Cambridge United. I said, we've got one of our guests on, got Jamie on. He paused, and he held my arm and he said, South Coast Jamie.
That is impressive.
That's
that is
good.
impressive.
I feel quite chuffed, to be honest with you. Someone remembered me. Or at least distinguished me from you.
So South Coast Jamie, of course, one of the things we have been doing is we're beginning our work on pulling together a map of ITV's Sunday regional football programs. Because if this was a radio show, it would be Who's Brian Moore? Or, in fact, as Phil memorably called it the other week, Who's Shaw Taylor? Because it occurred to people that anyone who didn't grow up in London and the South East wouldn't have got the big match on a Sunday. They would get their own ITV regional variant of that. Now, you, Jamie, were presumably it was TVS, was it in your day?
TVS, it was indeed. Yes, it was.
And they would focus presumably on Portsmouth, Southampton, and Bournemouth games.
We'd get Brighton as well. Brighton, Bournemouth, Southampton, Portsmouth. Yeah,
one of the great iconic South Coast football men is, of course, none other than Fred Dinage, isn't it?
Great Fred Dinage, former Portsmouth director as well. But I've got a bit of time for Fred, actually, because in one of Portsmouth's many meltdowns that they had financially prior to the really big one, I remember attending a meeting, actually, where Fred was the PR spokesperson for the Pompey SOS at that time, trying to raise some funds and find a White Knight chairman to come in. He was brilliant value that night, proper character. And it was one of those moments where he went, we're going to have to cut the meeting short because I've heard we've got to have a call with some US businessman later. So fingers crossed this is the one that can help us. And it transpired that this, of course, was Milan Mandrick, the guy who'd made millions in the States and drove us to the promised land of the Premier League.
It was a different sort of era it comes from an era where celebrities being part of the directors were absolutely kind of part of it. I mean, we used to have Oxford had Radio Oxford's lead presenter, commentator Nick Harris was on the board, and I'm not sure Jim Rosenthal is an Oxford fan. I don't know if he was ever a director. Jasper Carrott at Birmingham, Nick Owen at Luton, and to take it all the way to modern day, where we are tonight, the ultimate TV household celebrity name, Dion Dublin is a Cambridge director as well. So there you go. But we should, because we're not talking about the South, we are talking about Cambridge United. When you put things in context, this Cambridge United story, so we're going back to 1990 to 92, where Cambridge basically go from League Two or what was Division 4 then, right to the brink of the Premier League. They were, got to the playoffs. They were that close to getting into being an inaugural member of the Premier League, which would have been absolutely extraordinary. And the way they do it, and the character in particular under John Beck's management, has a whole sort of debate. And I do obviously love that we have three football purists here on the pod debating arguably the most long ball manager in football history, but we'll sort of come on to that. But yeah, the Cambridge story is extraordinary when you look at where they came from. We've obviously covered them and touched on them before with the great Ron Atkinson, who cut his managerial teeth at Cambridge, and that they were a club on the up at the time. In fact, though it wasn't Ron Atkinson who took them up, they do eventually get into the second tier, and they have a period of relative success until about 1983, at which point there's a change in how the gate receipts are worked out, which starts to favour the larger sides. And this is sort of seen as the reason Cambridge's fortunes slip away. They do slip away in the most glorious, if you're gonna collapse, do it properly. So they, 83, 84, when they slip out of what was the second division, then they set a record record run of 31 games without a win. So they go from October. I have the fixtures in front of me. They actually have a half decent start. They win 2 or 3 of their first 6 or 7 games, and then from October they embark on this 31 game. What's the opposite to unbeaten, unwinning record? A string of defeats amongst it, and they go, and it's right through until I think it's April when they finally win. When they beat Newcastle, which actually feels like a pretty decent result. By then, they are obviously relegated. This is that same Cambridge team that Nick Hornby, I think, writes about in Fever Pitch. He was at university at the time. And he followed them for I think for that season, went to the games and gloriously set about a dreadful 31 game record. And it was, I don't know if it's still the record run without a victory, but it certainly was at the time. They then continue that by getting promptly relegated the following year. And in 85-86, they have to apply for re-election to the league, which is one of our old-time favourite topics here, the old school applying for re-election. Now, Jamie Rooney, what happens in this process?
Yeah, it's been in play for some time where if you finish bottom of the Football League in the 4th tier, you would generally have to apply to stay in the league, and various teams would make an application to join the league. And Cambridge United had to do this themselves in 1970. They successfully gained election to the Football League, replacing the brilliant Bradford Park Avenue and denying us all of a Bradford derby from 1971 onwards. So, and we know from Hereford that you don't have to actually be the champions of your specific league to get elected to the league, as Hereford weren't. They finished second in their league, I think behind Chelmsford, because they went on a glorious run and it got a lot of profile and it made a man out of John Motson in terms of his football commentary. Hereford successfully, I think, were one of the only 5 teams in the 30-odd year history to gain election to the Football League.
Out of interest, any guesses as to the 2 teams that successfully applied for re-election more than any others?
Oh, good one.
I would go Wigan Athletic.
Torquay.
Well, Torquay. Okay, so Torquay's good. Torquay have applied for it 3 times. I'm not sure Wigan have, actually. Wigan were always around there. Halifax 12 times, Crewe 13 times, but tied with 14 re-elections. Both are Lincoln City and Hartlepool United. So Hartlepool in 82, 80 and 83 several times. So yeah, there you go. Some teams were lucky. But this side that John Beck inherits. So we get to the 1989-1990 season. Cambridge has sort of solidified a little bit. They're in the bottom league. They're doing okay. They've got half a chance. I think they're looking around mid-table. They're managed by Chris Turner at the time. And he'd signed John Beck originally, who was a silky ball-playing midfielder, which is interesting with what's to become. John Beck starts to get involved in coaching, and he's assistant manager at the outset of that season. And Chris Turner leaves, I think, for health reasons as much as anything, around December, January time. And John Beck arrives, and he's sort of given the job on a caretaker basis, but he makes a very quick impact. I suppose what's interesting, John Beck has very quickly worked out, even though he's played at a high level himself and is arguably would follow the beautiful game, he's very clearly worked out, if you want to get out of League Two, the most effective way of doing that is by playing as directly as you can. And that's really what he comes to be known for, isn't it?
I was looking at him in a kind of holistic view on this, and it seems like he, as you say, he just identified very quickly at that level what you needed to get out. But of course, as we'll probably go into, he was ahead of his time, wasn't he? In some of the stuff that he started to introduce. Some of the stuff that he did introduce is still in use today, but he was one of the forerunners of it. Now, as you mentioned, Graham, as we're all football purists here today, so it goes against the grain a little bit for me. But you can't help but admire the fact that he was smart enough to realise how he was going to dig his team out here and use his team in the most effective way. And some of the stuff he introduces is very clever, bordering on farcical, and lots of stuff in the middle, which I found fascinating.
There are two distinct things going on here, isn't there? That you've got one of them, which is arguably the dark arts of football, the stuff that goes on that the moral compass doesn't fully appreciate, albeit it's a tactic. And then you've got the tactics on the football pitch as well, in terms of what he's employing. So there's two streams in terms of his approach to getting Cambridge United to be a successful football team.
I tried to watch a fair bit of Cambridge. I remember this side at the time, and it'd be fair to say in my idyllic student days of the 1990s, where I believed everything was possible and anything was possible, including Oxford getting promoted back to the top tier, though that wasn't to happen. You know, I was a football purist. That was what I'd nailed my colours to that mast. And so I had decided I absolutely hated John Beck's style of football and everything it stood for. And, you know, I was far alone from having that view in football, as we'll discover. I think it's quite interesting watching. I tried watching some of their games again, and it's quite difficult to find actual, you know, full coverage. You can find a lot of highlight stuff. I stopped short of watching the full hour and a half of the Cambridge 1991-92 goals video, courtesy of Anglia TV, our friends in the East, which I mean. It's the commentary on that. I remember the commentary on the old Oxford goals ones was pretty horrendous. And what you could see, you know, there were, you know, unsurprisingly, a lot of goals from set pieces. There were a lot of crosses, a lot of headers, but it was quite difficult to get without being able to see how they set up for the whole game. It's difficult to sort of demonstrate quite how they were playing compared to that reputation, or how vastly different it was. But from what I had seen, the bit that you probably take, which we probably don't factor in, and which it has become part of the game, is the pressing, isn't it? That he got those players are pressing like Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. Yeah,
for sure. And he also, I mean, one of the other things he did as well, wasn't it? I mean, I was reading Steve Claridge's autobiography, and Steve obviously played under Beck in this promotion charge that he had, and he talks quite negatively about Beck in large parts of the book, but he does actually come down and say you have to give credit to him in the sense that we were incredibly fit as a team, and he had the defence and midfield perfectly organised. They worked as a complete unit. He used to take them to pre-season army camp training and run them to death for 2 weeks. But he said what that did was build camaraderie and huge amounts of fitness within the team. So they were able to, as you say, they were able to really press the game. And he said one of the other things he talks about is that Beck really got them eating, drinking and sleeping right. From my time sort of watching football, you know, Arsene Wenger was the first person to do this, if Sky Sports are to be believed. Beck was introducing, as I said, he gets, I think, rightly maligned in a lot of areas, and I think we'll explore this through the podcast, because I think if Beck had perhaps changed some of his thinking as he moved up the leagues, things might have changed, worked out a little bit differently for him. He does bring, and it's a success, isn't it? I mean, it's on the pitch; they get success, but you know, it's a fascinating story.
It has success right from the start, and I think your point about how it evolves, and it suggests something about the longevity and sustainability of the model of it, I guess. But the starting point is fantastic. From January, you know, he's caretaker manager. He wins manager of the month, not just once but twice in his first 2 months before even being made permanent. In fact, he gets the job on a permanent basis. Normally, it's quite often to get that bounce. You quite often see that. But to carry on for 2 months is quite impressive. They reach the quarterfinal of the FA Cup, which is, for a fourth tier side, is really quite impressive. You wouldn't expect to be able to do that more than once, which obviously they do go on to. I suppose to some extent, he was already involved in the club. Chris Turner, I'm not entirely clear what kind of football he played. I'm assuming they were pretty direct as well, perhaps not to the same. I mean, a lot of direct football was still relatively in vogue in that time with, Dave Bassett and Graham Taylor's Watford was still relatively fresh in the memory. So it's not totally counter. And of course, what you did have was you had a team that had players who played to those strengths. So this Cambridge side has, a very young Dion Dublin who is really coming to the fore.
Signed from Norwich.
It takes him a little while to establish himself there. He has a very short loan spell at Wickham amongst other teams. But that's really his season where it kicks on. There's John Taylor as well, the other sort of striker. Beck signs Claridge, in fact, from Aldershot, who joins in the January, I think. But I'm not sure Claridge necessarily plays that much in that initial side. And then they've got wingers who are the absolutely central part to this John Beck side is to have. There's no point in having two target men forwards if you don't have wingers putting crosses in, and they're the likes of Lee Philpott there, who that's exactly what they were doing.
I think this is Dion Dublin in particular. I think you have to give a lot of credit to John Beck for signing Dion Dublin, because John Beck has clearly shaped a style of football, and that style of football, as you mentioned, Graham, it probably took some influence from Graham Taylor, who he's seen play a particular brand of football in the lower leagues, has taken them right through to finishing runners-up in the first division, the Premier League as it is now, behind Liverpool, which is a massive success, playing a particular brand of football. Now, Graham Taylor got that from Charles Hughes, who was a football coach in the 1960s, who worked with the Olympic team, Great Britain and Northern Ireland Olympic team, who shaped the idea that if you put the ball into particular areas, I think he called it POMO, positions of maximum opportunity, and goals were generally scored with 3 touches or fewer. So they're very much analysts. Analysts right now and for the last 10 years in football have absolutely dominated how we digest football off the field. And Charles Hughes was inspired by a guy called Charles Reap, who was a wing commander in the Second World War, a football enthusiast, another analyst who studied football, and again was able to identify that if you put the ball into the opponent's box often and frequent, you're going to maximize your opportunities to score the 2 goals or more required generally to win a football match. So this whole chain of influence, and it's interesting that we draw back to the purest idea of playing football. And if we think of Guardiola now, you see long passes, and I think there's a difference between a long pass and a long ball. And I think tactically they do different things. But football teams don't like to play in this particular style, but it's fairly confusing because it is a hard style to play against. And when you sign Dion Dublin, who's tall, who's strong, who's physical, who can get in the air, and you're putting the ball into the box either directly or from the wide areas, you're maximizing your possibilities to score lots of goals, which is maximizing your possibility to get lots of points, which is maximizing your possibilities to get lots of promotions.
And that was at the heart of the philosophy, isn't it? And the heart of the philosophy was get the ball forward as quickly as possible, as directly as possible, and in particular to get it wide into the corners, and then get crosses in. And it was highly effective. I think, as you say, the two sort of things combined together in that season, because they've had that FA Cup run. They end up with the classic fixture congestion. They have 10 games that they have to play in the space of about 30 days to end the season. And here, to South Coast Jamie's point, the fitness starts to come in. So it's a pretty demanding series of tasks, of games to play all that inside a month. I think they win 6 or 7 of those last 10 games to squeak into the playoffs. And again, I think that those fitness levels are absolutely central to that, as well as also his motivational abilities, because you can't achieve what he achieves without having that man management stuff, I guess. What do you reckon, South Coast Jamie?
He had some very interesting man management styles to him, didn't he, Beck? I mean, Claridge speaks of the pseudo philosophy phrases he used to use in the dressing room. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the fight in the dog. And he also claims Beck used to use inspirational poetry, to quote him, which used to leave the team slightly flabbergasted. And of course, one of his other, if we're just talking about his own team here, because he did a lot of interesting things to ruffle the opposition's feathers as well. But of course, he was famous for the cold shower pre-match, wasn't he? So this apparently came about. It was the assistant manager at the time. They were having a hard time at Carlisle, I think, if I recall the story. And they suggested kind of waking the players up by sticking them in the shower. And it worked. And so it then became a tradition. An hour before the game, the substitute would be hosing the team down with a cold shower. And what they had to do was, I got quite into this. So they would squirt them with cold water for 10 seconds. The substitute would count out the 10 seconds. They would then leave the shower and have a bucket of ice cold water thrown over them. And they all had to do this. And Claridge speaks very amusingly about the fact that when he turned up after signing, he just refused to do it, and had an argument with Beck about it. And he said, "Well, we'll talk about this later." And Claridge made some suggestion that it had a heart problem, and if he was shocked, it was dangerous for him. So Beck said to him, "Well, I'm going to need a doctor's note on that." So Claridge said, "Okay, I will." And he went to the doctors and managed to get a doctor's note forged through saying that if his heart suffered a severe shock, it could endanger his life. So Claridge got out of the cold shower routine, but he just couldn't fathom it. But he said because of his relationship with Beck, it was kind of love-hate. Very often he was the sub, so he was the one squirting people with the cold water anyway, which he found kind of amusing. And he does say that since he left, when he left Cambridge, obviously he didn't have to worry about cold showers anymore, but he said he came across Liam Daish, who was a central defender under Beck at the time, and he said Daish just carried on embracing the cold shower thing and would take himself off on his own at Birmingham to dunk himself under the cold water and get himself fired up for it. So, yeah, very amusing. I'm glad I didn't have to do it. Although, of course, it's kind of come back now, isn't it? The Wim Hof thing. So maybe again, Beck was ahead of his time.
The other thing...
Go
on, Jamie.
The brilliance of Steve Claridge there, who's taken a doctor's note that says that if his heart suffers a shock, his life could be in danger. I mean, that kind of applies to everyone. So there was an opportunity for the whole team to get out of the cold showers if they just took Claridge's lead on that.
I mean, it's really interesting, actually. You read, there's a big chapter on it in Claridge's autobiography, and there's a real love-hate there, mostly hate for each other, which boils up into a massive brawl, which I'm sure we'll go into. But the thing is, they both kind of need each other as well. Claridge wants to play, and when he's brought on, he always gives everything, and he scores important goals for him. And Beck keeps trying to bend Claridge to his will of playing football his way, to the point again where Claridge says that that Beck introduced a hypnotist at one point to try and get the team more aligned mentally to what he was trying to do. And he retells a great story where the hypnotist is doing his act, and he said most of the lads are not under, but there's 4 or 5 of them that are, and one in particular, John O'Shea, who then is convinced that he's riding the winner in the derby with a tin hat on his head, rocking his chair backwards and forwards to the hilarity of the team. And again, I think that just engenders a team spirit there. But, these are the kind of tactics that Beck was employing. And again, if you just kind of take the line forward a bit, bringing in outside counsellors and whatever to teams, something that's absolutely done now, isn't it? But, Beck was just maybe just a bit too far ahead of his time at that time and went a little bit too far with it.
Jamie makes a really important point about Beck being ahead of his time. And we are here to judge the greatness of Cambridge United, and John Beck is a big component of that. And that's where we're driving the debate. We kind of brushed over it, and I think it's really important to point out. Graham, so you mentioned that Cambridge United make the FA Cup quarterfinals as a fourth tier team. Now, in the history of the FA Cup, and it's 150 odd years, no fourth tier team has ever made it to the semi-finals, and only 6 have made it to the quarterfinals that are the fourth tier or lower. So I think Cambridge United are a member of a pretty special club. Grimsby Town recently in 22-23, Lincoln as a non-league team made the quarterfinals. Cambridge United in this 89-90 season we're talking about. I think you have to go right back. Bradford City, Colchester, and the first ever fourth tier team in 1963-1964 to make it to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup was, Graham?
Well, I think it might be Oxford.
Look at me encouraging you to talk about Oxford United.
As if I need it, yeah. That was back in the day when people took that tournament seriously as well. A quarterfinal appearance there is worth plenty. It's interesting, Jamie, you were talking about the motivational phrases, and I hadn't put sort of two and two together, because he have an advertising hoardings saying quality put into the corners. I think the phrase was "put the ball down in the street, down in the quality street" was the point of it.
He famously grew the grass, didn't he, at the Abbey Stadium 6 inches longer in the corners so that the ball would hold up. And also it was more difficult for the defenders to bring the ball back out for the opposition team. I mean, some of the stuff he used to do, again, as Jamie mentioned, the dark arts, he was a forerunner in all of this, because Claridge talks about the fact that he would get the team to train on the pitch midweek to rough it up so that any quality team coming down just couldn't play the ball on the ground anyway. They would put the baths on in the opposition changing rooms before they turned up to heat it right up, so that it gave them a real sense of lethargic sluggishness in there. He'd also deflate the balls that they used to warm up, so they were harder to kick. He would put extra sugar in the tea urns as well. All these kind of fantastic things to just knock the opposition out of their stride.
It does exactly what it's meant to do. So, when they make it up to the second tier and they're playing even higher standard of teams, people like Glenn Hoddle are the ones who rile against John Beck's side. It is doing what it's meant to doing. It is creating them against us. He's taking a team of journeyman pros players, people who are in the second tier but careers probably going nowhere, and create something bigger than that, make them public enemy number one amongst, really get under the skin of these sort of more fancy down footballing sides and football people. I mean, I think Alan Ball is one of the first people to have a go at him as well. So those tricks definitely do something. I think they come to define his legacy in one form or another, better for worse. So they do go up that season. They go up via the playoffs. I wish I could see. I can't see the footage of it, but apparently in the second playoff game, which is I think it's in extra time at the time against Maidstone, they basically get their winner because at a corner, so they're defending a corner, and he leaves 3 men on the halfway line, 3 men attacking, and they clear the ball and break and score and get Dion Dublin gets the goal, and they go through that way. Now, I think the current trend in football is to leave no players outside of the box at corners. Oxford don't leave anyone out, and they all trail back. And I just like that sort of counterintuitive approach. I just think it gives teams something to think about. And if you have three players on the halfway line, what are you going to do about that?
If you take Beck in isolation. Sometimes as a purist, you don't like what he's doing, but he had some good ideas, and actually some of those ideas ended up maturing and being used in modern day football. If Beck was still around in his prime, he'd be the one swapping the goalkeeper out for a penalty shootout, wouldn't he? That would be, when that first came on, that was, wow. As you say, Beck's the one leaving 3 players up on the halfway line when you're defending a corner. Some of his stuff you have to admire, really.
What he's doing, the genius of that tactical decision, is he's putting doubt in the opposition and he's causing confusion. As an opponent, I can only imagine you're thinking, well, what's going on here? Have they got something set up? So if you've got a set play and you see 3 players on the halfway line, your set play may go out the window because there's doubt in the opponent's head in terms of what is going on. I think it's incredibly clever, and it's interesting to hear that people like Glenn Hoddle and Alan Ball may have taken an exception in terms of the style of Beck's play, but I commend it. I mean, yeah, I love the beautiful game played in a beautiful way, but I completely respect that it's played in various different ways, and there are no right and there are no wrong ways to play. The objective of the game is to score more goals than your opponent, is to win the game. And I think to judge how you do that takes you down a bit of a dodgy road, to be honest. I think we can all eulogize how we want the game to be played, but there are other ways to play it and there are other things that go on. And that's what makes it fascinating. And that's what makes this particular team and this particular coach fascinating, that he's introducing doubt into his opponent as the game is going on.
So they get to the final of that playoff, the first ever final played at Wembley, and Dion Dublin, who's a talisman really of this side, Dion Dublin scores the only goal and the first ever playoff final goal at Wembley, and they get promoted. They would go up to the 3rd tier at this point, Division 3, and again, this sort of plays into how team spirit and tactics are above everything else, really. Having promoted, I think he makes 1 signing, but it's broadly exactly the same side, same squad. They are 33-1 to win the title at the start of the season. So, nobody, people were still writing Cambridge off. They still don't value them, or they're underestimating them. And you can see, the same, who knows, exactly, they almost a total replica kind of season happens. On the one hand, they amazingly get to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup again. This isn't just by chance. They start off, not sluggishly, but they go on a fantastic run from around December time. They again end up with fixture congestion. They win something like 7 out of 10 games in April to sort of confirm their way right at the top there. Again, that fitness coming through, but it is the same. It's essentially the same group of players playing the same way with the same effect, which is they keep winning. And I think teams go in there underestimating that style of football, don't they?
Claridge makes the point in his autobiography about it to point out one of Beck's strengths here. They brought in some good players. He picked good players, and he said that was a very, very good team. That was the best lower league team he'd ever played in. There were good players in there. When you've got good players, and most of them are pulling in the same direction as the manager in terms of how he wants them to play, and you've got people like Dion Dublin up front who was fantastic for them. And it's ruffling feathers, isn't it? They're underestimating them. It's little old Cambridge. We can do this, and people are getting smashed by him physically and goal-wise.
The 2 quarterfinals in these 2 seasons, there's a third tier team and a 4th tier team that Beck achieves with Cambridge United. It's the only time in the history of this football club where they get to the quarterfinals, and he does it both times. Previously to that, they got to the 5th round once, and it's never been repeated. So it is a remarkable achievement because it's come from nowhere, and he's kept the consistency for 2 seasons in terms of getting into the last 8 of the FA Cup. And as you say, Graham, the FA Cup was a very big deal. It was a massive deal in 1990, I have to say.
Oh, definitely so. they play Arsenal in the quarterfinal, and they actually equalise. Despite going goal behind, they equalise. Dion Dublin, who, when I look through, so when I follow all of Cambridge's important games, Dion Dublin scores. Any game, any bit of footage I've seen of Cambridge, Dion Dublin scores. But he's got a decent record for them. But it's he's pretty prolific. But it's only sort of 50 odd in 120 games or something. Other players scored goals as well. But in my mind, Dion Dublin was the only one. And Dion Dublin, of course, who eventually gets his move to Man United off the back of this Cambridge success. But Dion Dublin, I do find it fascinating that this side has generated two TV personalities and pundits in the form of Steve Claridge, who has done a fair chunk of media along the way, but Dion Dublin, who has launched the most stellar career of. I mean, there is literally. Was there anything about when he was basically duffing up rival defences and sort of winning everything in the air? Was there anything in there that said this guy should host a daytime TV show about property?
No one could foresee, not even Alex Ferguson when he signed Dion Dublin in 1992 for £1 million, that Dion Dublin was going to end up as a coffee buddy with Martin Roberts.
It definitely is. Of course, Bobby Zamora hosts a fishing show on ITV, ITVX or ITV2, as we discovered a few weeks ago. So, I mean, it is in there. It is in the sort of talismanic forwards to have a TV career afterwards. But even hosting Homes Under the Hammer isn't even the most extraordinary thing I found about Dion Dublin. It was that he's invented a new percussion instrument. He's basically invented something called the dube, I think it is. Now, I stupidly thought the dube was named after Dublin, Dion Dublin in some way. So I assumed it was going to be the dube. But I think having seen it, because it appears to be... Now, it was not obvious to me that the drum needed reinventing, but it is a four-sided drum that he has invented. And you can go onto YouTube. He does a very good tutorial taking through all the different sounds of it. He's apparently a very good percussionist. Another string to his bow, which I had no idea. But it wasn't obvious to me that the drum needed reinventing. But this is very much in the same category as Craig Johnston and Craig's boot, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, I did. I loved the footage of Dublin playing the dube. I mean, as you say, I couldn't quite see where that's going to fit into the market when you've already got a drum. My instant thought was, well, that's what people have already got. They just have them next to each other rather than on the same object. But hey, who am I to call? Stepping back from it, fair play to him. He saw an opportunity and he went for it. I'm not sure it's been a huge commercial success, though, has it?
I haven't seen a band with the dube yet. Which, of course, the dube. I stopped myself finishing what I was going to say. So it's not named after Dublin. It's actually, I'm thinking, is bringing together the word drum and the word cube for the dube, but has a hint of Dublin. I think that's where they're coming with on that. But Dion Dublin is one of the undoubted stars of this side. John Taylor gets a lot of goals for them, is very popular with fans. So again, people, Dion Dublin picked up as a youngster from Norwich. John Taylor picked up from, I think it's Sudbury Town, from non-league football. All these guys, and a number of them go on to have good careers. Lee Philpott goes on to play for Leicester very successfully. Dion Dublin, obviously we talked about Man United, Steve Claridge. A lot of them, I think Alan Kimball plays for this side, and he goes on to play for Wimbledon. These are players who, coming back to the point you were making earlier, there were good players in this team.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's also Gary Rowett in there. He goes on to have a Premier League career too. And as you say, Alan Kimball, the perfect training ground really for him at Cambridge, then go and play 7 seasons at Wimbledon, isn't it? And as you say, as we've seen, they had some good players there, and Beck has to take some credit for that. Again, he's found these lower league, non-league players and made them into a team that tear up the league.
Remarkably, they don't just finish in the playoffs and they don't just get promoted. They win the League One title, 33-1 shots, and the roller coaster they're on at this point is extraordinary. And I think the other element, and we see it quite a lot, it does go a little bit with the territory with sides who play direct football. You have the height there. Is set pieces. Set pieces become really difficult to defend. Long throws, corners, free kicks. I mean, they score a hell of a lot of goals from them. And of course, that's something you can work on on the training ground, which is absolutely part of the Beck model of having a really drilled team.
And part of that authoritarian attitude towards it, didn't he? There's a great quote again from Claridge who says that each week Beck would give a £15 bonus to who he thought had executed his tactics the best or who had kicked the ball longest in the previous game. To your point about Beck's kind of tactics, this is where him and Claridge kept falling out. Claridge used to get hugely frustrated with Beck wanting his forwards to just knock the ball on, flick it on and get in the box. The tension starts to build between those two specifically at about this time when they then enter the second tier, as they say.
I think what you see happening there is, as this narrative and what's happening at Cambridge is getting more attention, and the way John Beck's playing his football and the tactics there's more and more talk about how this is being put together. And I think I can't remember. The famous quote is somebody describes him as the Dracula of football because he's sucking the lifeblood out of the game. This is the kind of thing that he's dealing with. Beck has kind of two routes to go at this stage, and one is to sort of relent and let go of some of that discipline, and particularly as again, they're not spending a lot of money on players, especially compared to some of the other teams that are in that league. When they're in the second tier, they've got Jack Walker's Blackburn at that stage. So Kenny Dalglish is in there. That's you've got teams with real budgets that you're competing with. It's definitely this narrative about the team, but if anything, he doubles down on it. He goes even further, becomes even more passionate about this is the way. I think he changes his assistant manager, so Gary Peters steps up. Well, had been Gary Johnson, I think I've seen described as another acolyte of the long ball game. They just double down on it, and who's to blame him? He has had 2 promotions on the bounce from nowhere playing this game, and it should be mentioned he took a really sort of brave decision in terms of career paths and bits and pieces you don't necessarily see, and it's particularly worth thinking about given what actually came of his managerial career afterwards. Leicester City, who are in that league, they come in for him. He opts to stay with Cambridge. He genuinely thinks he can achieve history, which would have been history. 3 consecutive promotions, as you mentioned at the top of the pod. That would have got them into the inaugural Premier League. That would have been, that wasn't part of the idea. That wasn't the plan for the Premier League, to have Cambridge United in there. Not only to have Cambridge in there, but to have a direct long ball team, and to not only have the team that is playing more long ball than anyone else. I don't know if that is certainly them v us kind of approach. And to begin with, it works. I think the players have another particularly tough summer of training. I think he drills them ridiculously hard over the summer, but they start the season in excellent form. They make a really solid start, and by October time, they actually go top of Division 2 as it was then, and they stay there until December. An incredible achievement for a side 2 seasons ago, from when he took over them. He's got them from the middle of the 4th tier to top of the 2nd tier, and doing it with a remarkably similar number of players. I think the team that gets promoted plays in the last game of their Division 3, as it was, the third tier championship, contains 7 players who played in John Beck's first game. That's 2 divisions up. He is really backing those players. But you do start to see that point that you're talking about, Jamie, that players are starting to get a little unhappy with the discipline.
The tension builds when Cambridge, who are currently third, play Ipswich, who were second, so a big game for them. And this is where Claridge has the almighty bust up with Beck, and Claridge says that he in the first half he's playing and he makes the cardinal sin of playing the ball inside to one of his midfield players. So half time comes along and Beck immediately subs him. So Claridge, disgruntled by that, sulks off to the medical room, walks out the dressing room. Beck then goes in after Claridge and tells him to get back in the dressing room, at which point Claridge tells him to effing do one and to shove it up his arse, to quote him. At which point Beck launches a headbutt at him, which Claridge ducks. And Claridge goes into great detail in the book here, which is a fascinating read because you always want to know what happens behind the scenes. So Claridge ducks the headbutt and then lands a punch on Beck, giving him a black eye. Then Beck comes windmilling in with more punches, and Claridge grabs him in a headlock in the medical. So this is all kicking off in the medical room whilst the team are having their halftime cuppa. At which point, Gary Peters, the assistant manager, and Liam Daish hear the commotion, come running in and pull them both apart. And Beck spits, "I'll see you after the game, Claridge," and they get pulled apart. So the game then carries on with Beck sitting in the dugout with a black eye for the second half. So at the end of the game, it finishes 1-1. Claridge is in the dressing room expecting all hell to break loose. And he said, most surprisingly, Beck points at him and says, "It's a shame you lot didn't show as much fight as this lad did at half time." And remarkably, Beck never mentions it again. And he said the relationship kind of almost improved for the last few months of the season after that. But yeah, just remarkable, full-on fist fight with the manager. The point here is obviously cracks are starting to appear. Claridge tries to get a bit of a revolt going as well in terms of trying to get some of the players to stand up and say this style of play is not going to work anymore. He points out that you're getting to a higher level and teams now are working you out because they know that you've been instructed as a forward to go wide and knock the ball in as early as possible. So at which point centre backs are stepping off you, you've got nowhere to go, and the full backs are deliberately dropping deep. So they're waiting for the long ball to come in and they're already ahead of you. And you're playing better players, of course. And there's a famous quote from Claridge as well when he's actually playing against Portsmouth, and he takes on their defender guy Butters, and Butters goads him by saying, "Go on, go inside me. You can't, can you?" Because he knew that Claridge, as a Cambridge striker, wasn't allowed to cut inside and had to go down the line. So, they were becoming easy to defend against. The wheels are starting to come off, but the problem is for Beck, I think he just refuses to, as you say, Jamie, he doubles down on it. He refuses to bend his tactics and just push further on.
That Ipswich game is quite pivotal. Going into that, they're second in the old Division 2, the Championship, Tier 2 as we call it now. And they stay second until 4 games to go. And Graham, you're right. No team in the history of English professional football has ever had 3 consecutive promotions. Never been achieved before. In the non-leagues, it's been done by a number of teams, but never in the professional game. And Cambridge are within 4 games of finishing automatic promotion place because they're second with 4 games to go. But they do wilt off towards the end, and whoever that is, because what Jamie's talking about, maybe Beck becomes so fixated on his ideas that he's not willing to adapt to see the team over the line and maybe cause surprise. But yeah, 4 games, and they're going to be founding members of the new Premier League and the first team in history. Absolute warrants greatness to do 3 successive promotions, but they don't achieve that.
You can see these sort of different stages of it of how do you deal with a team like Cambridge who are so direct, who have such an approach. And I think if for that first season teams were just blitzed by it, they just had no idea what to expect. I think in that second season teams knew what to expect but just underestimated it. They just thought it can't work at this level. And I think there's probably some of that has happened over the first half of that season in League One as they're doing exceptionally well. I think League One, I've called it every division under the sun so far. It's second tier, whatever it is now. Whatever it is, it's not League One. It was League One for one brief. Oh no, is it League One now? Anyway, you've got a combination that teams. I think teams are, once they've been turned over once by Cambridge, they're taking them properly seriously. As Jamie says, they have the players who can deal with them, can defend them. The cracks are starting to appear in the Cambridge side. Not Claridge isn't the only one. John Taylor is sold. There's an argument with John Beck over that. They sell him to, I think it might even be a swap deal with Devon White, who moves over from Bristol Rovers. And Taylor has been a key part of the goals that are coming through. What starts to happen in that back end of the season seems to be that the Cambridge, for the first time, start struggling to score goals. And this is entirely to Beck's credit of the team that he created, was that throughout the way, they were regularly scoring. They would score consistently. They had strikers who they had goals all over the pitch. And this stumble to get over the line is as much the goals start drying up. And that obviously then begs the question, are they drying up because the model doesn't work? Because it's probably the first time in his period managing them where the question can legitimately be asked. It's like, why do you think we're struggling, boss? Do you think it might have something to do with the fact I'm not allowed to pass backwards or turn inside or play a short pass? You can see how that kind of narrative would happen, especially when you have rival managers and you have actually probably quite a snobby football media and snobby football, this is myself included, who were there thinking they're not playing it the right way. This isn't how it should be done. That then puts those strains on there. But as Jamie says, they come within an inch of automatic promotion. They do finish in the playoffs. They make the playoffs. They are theoretically 3 games away from the Premier League. They play Leicester, ironically, who Beck could have been managing, and they get a sort of creditable draw in the first game, and the second game goes wrong. They end up losing that 5-0, although they miss a couple of quite significant chances in that. And this moment of making history is gone. But actually, what's incredible is how quickly Beck and that Cambridge story is gone. In the summer, Claridge and Dublin go. So I think Claridge presumably Claridge goes to Leicester at that stage. Oh no, I don't think it's Leicester actually. Then I
think he goes to Luton.
That's right.
He goes to Luton. He goes to pretty much every club in the whole league anyway. But I think it's Luton.
Yeah, there's no club he hasn't played for. I think he rejoins Cambridge after Beck has made his departure.
Yes,
so I think that's why he exits. And of course, as mentioned before, the Dube inventor, Holmes under the hammer, talismanic striker, Dion Dublin gets his move to Man United, which actually, even that's an interesting move because Ferguson had a habit of doing this every now and then. But Dion Dublin wasn't an obvious Man United player, was he? I mean, again, he's coming from an unfancy team with, a brilliant goal return, but you have somebody who's made his name of just heading in long balls at the end. It's not the obvious player for Man United or Ferguson to sign, is it?
At the time when Dublin comes in, there's Hughes and there's McClare, 2 brilliant forwards, but Ferguson was trying to sign Alan Shearer, but failed to sign him. Shearer went off to Jack Walker's Millions. So Dublin comes in and he scores an incredibly crucial goal in that season. Now, that's the season that United go on and win their first Premier League, their first league title for 26 years. And United lose famously the opening game against Sheffield United. They then play Everton in midweek, and Everton win 3-0. So going into the third game, United haven't won. There's been a bit of pressure on Manchester United to win the Premier League after they failed the previous season when Leeds United pipped them and won it by 4 points. And Dion Dublin plays in the away game against Southampton. And it's tight all the way up until the 89th minute. And Dion Dublin scores the winning goal, the only goal of the game. And it really endears him to the Manchester United fans. He really becomes a loved football player at that particular club at that particular moment, because his goal has given the first points of that particular season. And it does set Manchester United on the journey where they go on and dominate English football for almost 20 years. That's the moment where it's triggered.
Bearing in mind what John Beck achieved at Cambridge, and they're still sitting in the second tier. They have a bad start to the season. It doesn't go well. They're 18th at the time in October, but by October, Beck is sacked, and there's no question this narrative of long ball will only get you so far, and the limitations of it, and the sort of anger it generates among commentators, players, supporters when it's not working. It's the kind of thing that actually, when you're riding high and you're winning games and you're scoring goals and everything's looking great, people don't mind. But I think people do react, even a style which isn't quite as direct as John Beck employed. I think fans turn on that quite quickly because it does look a bit clueless when it's not working. And in this instance, you could see, that he is gone by October. You can see that the love affair has very swiftly run its course. And I think there was a bit of, some of that player rebellion. And there's definitely an element to which players want to express themselves on a football pitch and probably don't want to have cold showers all the time, although Liam Daish perhaps proves otherwise. And this is to be a kind of a high point that's never really replicated again by either Cambridge or John Beck. So Cambridge have a difficult few years. As Jamie says, they drop into the conference. Many a good team's done that and come back. And Cambridge have come back. And of course, here's your quiz question for today. South Coast, Jamie may well know this, but Jamie Rooney, do you know who the current manager of Cambridge United is?
I do. And it's Gary Monk.
Gary Monk, who has emerged from nowhere to become Cambridge United's manager, which I do like. So Cambridge are powered by the goals of Paul Mullin. Cambridge did successfully get themselves up into League One, where they continue to ply their trade. Now, John Beck, he gets a job at Preston and does sort of okay there, and at Lincoln. I mean, it's interesting. I was reading, a very interesting article with interview with him from 2 or 3 years. He's quite bitter by that stage, but he basically talks about actually when he was at both Preston and Lincoln, he saved both sides from relegations according to his achievements there, difficult jobs. But you can start to see that the baggage that goes with a John Beck side is taking its impact. And he certainly feels the stuff around him is what kind of starts to work against him. So yeah, in this interview goes, our chairman would say, John Beck, oh yes, long ball, cold showers, dirty tricks. People only remember bad stuff. It's all a load of cobblesticks. Cobblesticks is a weird word, actually. I would have thought cobblers, but there you go. Beck does come back. So he's involved with Histon, and Histon basically do the same in the conference. They come from sort of nowhere. They're a team near Cambridge. I'm not quite sure. It's very close to Cambridge, Histon. The manager is a chap called Steve Fallon, who I think used to play with John Beck. But John Beck is essentially an assistant there. And they did exactly the same. They took that league by storm, had a couple of really good years, got very close to getting promoted, but didn't. and again, Histon fell away relatively quickly. John Beck had a very brief spell as manager there, and that's really the last of it. The only bit I did mean to flag before we get to judging this fantastic team is I need to put to bed this suggestion that Oxford-Cambridge is some kind of derby. The varsity derby. So I get asked it as an Oxford fan. I get asked to mention this computer. Oh, derby! This isn't a derby. Oxford-Cambridge is not a derby. A few years ago, Cambridge had a French manager took over. His name escapes me now. René something, I think it was. He joined them, a couple of games before the Oxford game, and then I remember him doing the pre-match on. And of course, you have this big derby with Oxford. So I've been to season ticket holder at Oxford, and I can tell you, I think the crowd's quite funny, but I don't think any of them have been at footlights. It's not any of. There's no varsity humour there. It's definitely not. The only connection I could think was that Oxford had a centre-back called Kerry Evans, or Dr. Kerry Evans, New Zealand international, who was studying medicine at the university and broke off that career to play in the second tier for Oxford for a few years and for New Zealand successfully before, I think, going on to become a doctor. So there you go. There's a small little trivia fact for you. We should get to ranking and thinking about John Beck and Cambridge's place in history. As a reminder, we have 5 categories of greatness, from all-time greats to the top, true greats, where, of course, Jamie thinks West Germany should be. Our middle category, touch of greatness, and then edge of greatness, and then blink of greats. Let's start with Jamie Rooney on this. I always like to start with you mostly. How great is this Cambridge side?
There's lots of great things about this Cambridge United team, and they are without doubt Cambridge United's all-time greatest team. There's a touch of greatness in terms of the back-to-back promotions, the FA Cup quarterfinals, the genius, I think, that is Beck, ahead of his time, as South Coast Jamie has mentioned. I think he's absolutely ahead of his time in terms of some of his methods. I think the moral argument about whether he's playing the football in the right way is a load of old rubbish. Personally, I think there is no right or wrong ways. There are just ways to play football. And you're absolutely right, Graham. When the chips are down and it gets a bit tricky, it's always going to be the first thing thrown at him. And they get to the edge of greatness because they could have been founding members of the Premier League. So they do cross a lot of our categories. But I'm going to rank them and kick them off in the blinkered greatness category.
Blinkered great. Blinkered great. Unbelievable. South Coast, Jamie, where are you going to head?
Yeah, I agree a lot of what Jamie said there, actually. But I when I started the research on this, I was a bit anti Beck, but actually, the more I read up, the more I learned. I started to quite like him. The genius and the madness of the man. I think he did have a number of forward-thinking ideas, actually, that are still resonating now. Currently, the statistics, the fitness, the health, the diets, some of the mind games, the dark arts. He was ahead of his time, and you can't knock the promotions. He had back-to-back promotions. He got that team playing to its maximum. A number of those players that he picked ended up having fantastic Premier League careers. And so, for me, it's got to be a touch of greatness.
Touch of greatness, I like it. You see, I'm really torn. I am torn because I think John Beck was both many years ahead of his time, but also many years behind his time as well. So there's a kind of Sergeant Major-y kind of approach to this. Yeah. So, he's a really contradictory figure who I both, like you, Jamie, I've become quite fascinated by him. And my starting point was like you. I was part of the wokerati, the mob, the whatever it's called, the establishment who didn't want him to succeed, based on sort of general snobbery. And actually, it is it is an unbelievable achievement what he does to take that side from where he does in the way. And if he had got them promoted, even though every inch of me would at the time would have been willing them not to do it, if they'd got to the Premier League, that would just be one of the most incredible stories. Now I see that from a bit of time, and part of me also really admires the way that I'm just going to double down on this, whatever, even though the players are rebelling against it, the fans seem to be rebelling against it. I think I'm right. He's got quite good reason to think he was right, and he so nearly did it. But blink of greats. I can see certainly how Cambridge might. You could see that given Cambridge's success in the pantheon of the game. Touch greatness feels maybe a bit. Well, I think edge of greatness really hits it for their. They were on the edge of achieving the incredible dream. So I think I will sit in between you two, and I suggest that John Beck's Cambridge United edge of greatness.
Just to finish on this, I guess, is that we love kits. We love to talk about kits, and we haven't really talked about Cambridge United's kit, the amber and black, which is a beautiful colour combination. But on their badge, it's quite unusual. So most football clubs will have something that is related to the town or city where they're from. The Cambridge United badge is just a big C and a big U, and that's the Cambridge United badge. So Graham, I think in this instance, we can be really grateful that Cambridge United wasn't one of those new towns you've talked about previously.
Well, on that note, we will leave it. South Coast Jamie, thank you so much for joining us on a chance to relive some Steve Claridge love.
Yeah, absolutely. No, always enjoyable being part of the team. So I look forward to the next time.
Regular Jamie, thank you for your time again.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much truth in that, Graham, as well. Yeah, always great. Jamie, brilliant to have you on again. Absolutely wonderful and delightful as a guest. Really engaging, and thank you so much for helping to tell us the story about this brilliant Cambridge United football team.
Next week, we are going to have a story. This one will be close to your heart as well, South Coast Jamie. We are going to do the 1982 England World Cup team. Brian Robson scoring after 30 seconds and so forth. So we will have that next week. So that's one to look out for. As a reminder, you can find out all the teams that we have covered previously and our rankings and our team sheets that we have for all the various teams, together with bits of video as well, at our website, which is thegreatestteam.co. And a reminder, of course, if you have enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe or like or tell a friend, and we will speak to you next time.